has 626 different cloud applications. In total, they found 2,000 different cloud applications. And these numbers sounded funny, but consider that even in file sharing, where I think of Dropbox and Box and Google Drive, there are 19 different applications in use. So you may not, if you're in IT, you may not be aware of them, but there are literally hundreds and hundreds of cloud applications in use in your organization. And only in what SkyHigh found was only 11% are enterprise ready. So I think that some technology there for you to get your arms around that issue is an absolute must-have as a category. I'd say on the mobile side, since you mentioned mobile as well, I think there's been an evolution there where it's moved from managing at a device level to managing at a more granular level applications and content. And people like Mobileyeon and a couple of others in that area have made that transition from devices to applications and content. And again, I think that's another category where you have to have a solution, and that solution needs to cover all three of those devices, content, and applications.
So I completely agree with this Arif that shadow IT is an enormous problem, and I think the battle effectively has been lost by the IT. I don't think that there is a way for IT to really regain as much control over the kind of enterprise layer of IT as they have in the past, just because everybody has become effectively a power user these days. So I would separate kind of the way that I think about those two issues between sort of the control and the management versus the security. Because I think that the security element of that, the idea that everybody is accessing enterprise data from mobile devices, likely over unsecured Wi-Fi hotspots, is an enormous problem. I think that's a place where people are spending real money. I think they'll continue to spend a lot more money, and I do think that that's an area that's going to sort of be great for startups, but I think it's also kind of an important area for enterprise IT to pay attention to and invest in.
Yeah, it's interesting. The typical approach in the past has been to block these things. CISOs or CIOs would say, well, there's no way that you can actually use Box, or there's no way that my employees can use Dropbox. The reality is employees are going to use them. They are going to use them, data will get out, and so to use Netscope's words, it allows the new block. If you can give analytics, if you can give visibility, if you can give some level of granular policy control, now you're empowering the CIO or the CISO to let enterprise users get the applications you want, but also give the enterprises some of the security, compliance, auditability, and control or alerts that they need.
How important is it to sort of triage and kind of figure out, okay, this data absolutely has to be controlled, some of this we can just kind of let go, and there are tools that help you do that, actually tag certain types of data and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you look at this new class of companies that's emerging, and that is exactly what they do. The first step that they give is visibility. Here are the 650 applications that your employees are using, even though you, Mr. CIO, think that you're only using 20 or 25. The reality is you've got 650. Well, the next step is, and here's the data that's actually flowing into some of these places, and guess what? Box might be more secure than Dropbox or vice versa. We'll give you a perspective on that, but there are a series of applications that you don't even know about where your data is flowing to China. Did you know that? Or that your data is sitting in a data center in Russia. Well, that might be a little dangerous. So now you can actually give a little bit of prescriptive formulation in terms of, yes, allow cloud-based storage, but you should use best practices. You should think about risks associated with various applications that your employees are using and prescribe some best-in-class applications.
I think that Alex and Arif both touched on the bigger point about how the role of IT has evolved and has changed. And I feel that in some ways there's never been a better time to be in IT and never been a more challenging time. Better in the sense that today you have all these crazy venture capitalists funding these wacky technologies, subsidizing these unprofitable companies to bring, and it's all for you because all these companies are there to design new technologies for you to experiment with, for you to try out, for you to decide what works, because you are the final judge. I mean, ultimately, you are the one who will decide what technologies take root and what don't. And in years gone by, I think that life may have been a bit less interesting where you used by Oracle and SAP. Today, Oracle's not buying Oracle because they're out there buying cloud companies. And you have a much richer menu of things to go and choose from. So I think that it is a much, much more interesting job than ever before. It's more challenging because you no longer have that control, as Alex and Arif were alluding to. And so now it's more of an enabling role, and it's more of being a trusted advisor to the business units who will go off and adopt technology. And for those who can make that transition, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, we've faced that a little bit in the venture industry. It used to be entrepreneurs in an alternative source of capital and so on. And so investors would have more control. Today, entrepreneurs have lots of choices. We have virtually no control over the companies in which we invest in. And I think it's an analogous thing going on in IT where you have to be that advisor. And for those who can do it, it's a wonderfully rewarding job.
How does somebody in IT keep track of all the different companies that are emerging that might actually fill a need of, apart from reading CITEworld and coming to the site conference? It's this is your job to see these companies early on. At what stage is it, proper to look, and how do you find out? It's a challenge.
Well, you talk about the 460 other IDG publications you can keep track of as well, right? So I think, frankly, I think it's an enormous issue. I'm sure, we have a kind of custom-built CRM app. I'm sure that, both Sequoia and Lightspeed are using, some software to keep track of that as well. In our case, the issue becomes focus. So in the US, we have a relatively small team. We're focused on early stage investments, which basically means first venture money into a company. So we're keeping track of seed and Series A investments. And we're doing that primarily through our personal network of about 10,000 people, keeping track of really interesting companies that are coming up, and then try to be thoughtful and thematic, just the way that you're asking the questions.
Yeah, from an enterprise perspective, I think it's no longer about an IT group having a large spreadsheet of applications. I think it's really about the users that are self-selecting into apps to get stuff done that IT hasn't allowed them to get done. And so, again, not to beat a dead horse, but there are tools out there that will help IT figure out what are the applications, the 500 to 2,000 applications that are in use, and then IT can then select into, what are the best practices that I should be adopting from a policy and from a compliance perspective. From a venture perspective, it's very similar. It's very thematic. We've got our own CRM systems, our own network of people who are helping us see what some of the trends are, and we're very thematic in how we think about next generation applications. Again, I think big data and social, as applied to an application, a mobile-first application, are very important trends. And that is going to drive the next generation of enterprise software, frankly, in my opinion.
So, we're in the fortunate, or depending how you look at our fortunate position of spending our days meeting new technology. You realize that you guys have real jobs and other stuff you need to do. Many customers I know just feel pounded by the number of vendors hitting them over email or over the phone. There's just no way that you can meet all of them or even a reasonable fraction of them. And so I think you have to adopt a different approach. I'd say the number one thing that works in terms of looking at new technologies is if you have a trusted circle of people who you can go to and ask what they're using. And that could be a peer group. It could be ideally people in different domains. I'd certainly be happy to offer an opinion on any technology area that you're looking at. There are other people who are knowledgeable about the industry. So I'd actively try and develop, just even if it's over email, a group of people who you can ping just to get a sense for what's out there in the market. Secondly, I think there's just way more on the internet than has ever been before, and it's pretty straightforward just to do some simple searches, to look at social media like Twitter, follow people who are knowledgeable in an area just to keep up on what's bubbling up. And I think from those two things, you can form a kind of an opinion of what are the areas that people are really thinking about, and then within those areas, what are the couple of leading companies. And I would only meet the 2 or 3 leading companies in the high priority areas because there just isn't time. I'd say the final guide could be what your business users are actually adopting, because very often they're going out there, they're trying out different stuff, and certainly for any business application, I'd be guided by what the users want to use.
We're getting short on time, so I want to close with, what do you 3 think the next big consumer or user technology that's going to come to work is going to be? So we saw smartphones really came in that way, tablets really came in that way. Arguably, even cloud computing in the early phases of the web were mostly consumer. What do you think is going to be the thing that invades this year, next year, in the next 3 years?
Sure. Since you didn't say that we can't pick one of our portfolio companies, I'll pick on one in our portfolio. So there's been emerging talk of this idea of anticipatory computing or anticipatory search. And I think as predominant amount of time is now being spent on mobile devices where frankly you're not going to spend put in the effort to type in 5 or 7 word Google query, and you actually want to do a search. The technology that's built into the application or built into the device that enables the user, either the enterprise or the consumer, to conduct a search and perhaps anticipates what information you're looking for is going to be, is beginning to emerge, and I think it's going to be really important. We have an investment in a company called Expect Labs. There are some internal projects in Google that are kind of similar in this vein, so I think that's going to be an important development.
Yeah, I would build on that in terms of adding, we're seeing more and more sensors and more things. They talk about this trend called the Internet of Things, but it basically means that things are connected. Things are connected, things are accessible either over the internet or over your mobile device, but that also creates a new set of applications that are predictive in nature, that are contextual in nature. I think we're starting to see the early grains of that in Google Now, which has delighted me many times in terms of one, telling me when I need to leave or where I need to be. This is Google's predictive technology that goes in, scans all of your emails, your calendar, and tells you, before you even knew that you needed to ask, answers to some of your questions. I think we're going to see more and more of that as more devices and more services come online over the next couple of years.
I think 5 years from now, we'll be making all our IT purchases using Bitcoin. We'll be getting working on self-driving cars. We'll come home to find our Amazon packages being dropped off by drones.
Anticipatory, there's an app called Refresh, which I use occasionally, which is very good at compiling all that information. All right, we have 20 seconds left, so one word or phrase each. What is overhyped right now? Alex, sorry.
Bitcoin.
Wearables.
Wearables, okay.
Social enterprise.
Social enterprise. All right, thank you very much. Big warm round of applause for